Thank you for tuning in to LeadDeveloper.com, where we simplify complex property development feasibilities, investment analysis, and everything real estate. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, our Google Sheets-based feasibility suite streamlines the toughest aspects of real estate. Lead Developer Feasibility Suite is trusted by thousands in over 17 countries. Our tools cover everything from quick assessments to detailed cash flow projections and more. Sign up today at LeadDeveloper.com for unlimited free access to our expanding library of real estate tools. No credit card needed. Plus, get full support through Edge with step-by-step guidance, exclusive courses, and resources designed for your success. Turn numbers into narratives that win over investors and lenders. Join Lead Developer now.
Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be talking about property ownership.
Yeah, always a fun topic.
It is, yeah. And we're looking at this great article, 8 important considerations for property ownership. So
like it.
It should be very insightful.
Yeah, sounds like a great resource. Should be a lot to unpack there.
It does. So one of the first things it talks about is this idea of a property ownership cycle. And I thought that was interesting. So you've got the buy, manage, and revert are the 3 stages they outline.
Okay, yeah, the life cycle of a property.
Yeah. And they emphasize how that cycle really impacts a property's worth
Right.
at different points.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then it goes on to kind of challenge this idea that you make money when you sell a property.
Oh, interesting.
And they say, no, you really make your money when you buy it, if you buy it at the right price.
That's a good point. I mean, yeah, if you overpay at the beginning, then you're already starting off on the wrong foot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was something I hadn't really considered.
Right.
I see.
Yeah. It makes you think about being a really smart buyer right out of the gate.
Yeah, absolutely. Due diligence and all that good stuff, making sure you're not, overpaying based on emotion or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Really understanding what that investment value is.
Yeah.
Distinct from market value.
Yeah. That's another thing they talk about.
Right.
Is this idea of investment value versus market value.
Okay. Yeah, so how do you determine the value and for what purpose, right?
Exactly. And they give the example of, are you somebody who wants to flip a house?
Right.
And make a quick profit?
Yeah.
Or are you more of a long-term investor who wants to see, rental income?
Buy and hold.
Yeah, and appreciation over time. So it's a really different mindset depending on your goals.
Yeah, you got to know your goals going in for sure.
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve with this property?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, they also go beyond the financial aspects and they talk about
kind of the use and pleasure, I think is how they phrase it, like the unique benefits of owning property that you just don't get
right
with other types of investments.
Yeah, the intrinsic value you get from
exactly.
Yeah.
And so they give some really interesting examples like owning your own home, just that feeling of home ownership.
Pride of ownership for sure.
And how that kind of outweighs, maybe what you would save on rent.
Right.
Especially for, really high-end homes.
Yeah.
It's more than just the numbers.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Especially when you compare it to something like renting, Yeah. And they also talk about owning raw, undeveloped land, which is interesting.
Yeah. So you have an asset that appreciates over time, but also you could potentially rent it out for farming or hunting.
Right. Generate some income.
Which is a whole other layer of value.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's the excitement of developing a project.
Right.
Whether it's commercial or residential. Obviously, there's higher risk there, but the potential rewards could be huge.
Much higher reward.
Yeah. So you've got that. And then you have this kind of like...
spectrum.
Yeah, you have like the opposite end of the spectrum where it's like, a seasoned earnings-producing real estate.
Okay.
Which is low-risk, stable income.
Yeah, kind of like the more mature asset that's already generating consistent cash flow.
Exactly.
Yeah. Steady Eddie.
Yeah. And they also mentioned the idea of owning the property where your business operates, which could be a real game changer for a lot of business owners, especially in a volatile market.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Control over your own destiny, kind of. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You're not subject to the whims of a landlord or rent increases or anything like that. You can really, customize the space. And
you're not beholden to somebody else's decisions about your business.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So moving on, they talk about capital gains over time and how smart investors really balance that immediate cash flow with the long-term appreciation potential.
Right. It's not always about the quick buck.
Exactly.
It's about that long game.
Yeah. And they break down, the various factors that can drive those gains. The developer's efforts, inflation, market cycles, improvements you make to the property, even things like lease agreements.
Right.
If they're strategically structured.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a lot to unpack. And then speaking of market cycles,
Yeah.
which is something we've talked about on this show before.
Of course, a classic.
It's so important, right? Understanding those ups and downs can be a huge advantage for investors.
For sure.
Who know how to ride those waves.
Right. If you can, anticipate those trends, buy low, sell high.
Right.
It's all about timing.
Yeah, it's all about that timing. And then that leads perfectly into this idea of public and private restrictions on properties. Because that can really change how you view a property's value and potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not just about what's within your property lines. It's about the broader context.
Right.
The regulations, the agreements with your neighbors, all of that.
Yeah. They give the example of, imagine living in a quiet neighborhood of single-family homes and suddenly a trash dump gets built next door.
Oh, yeah. That's a nightmare scenario.
It sounds awful, right?
Yeah.
But it really highlights the importance of zoning laws in making sure that land is used in a way that makes sense for everyone.
Protects property values, for sure.
Yeah. So zoning's huge. And then there's also building codes, size restrictions, all those kinds of things that we have to consider. And of course, in today's world, environmental restrictions are becoming more and more important as we try to find that balance between development and protecting natural spaces.
Sustainability.
Yeah. And so the article even gives examples like wetlands, buffers, view easements, and how those environmental concerns are really impacting development now.
Right.
Yeah. And then we move on to these private restrictions, like easements and covenants.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not just the government regulations. There's also private agreements.
Exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
So think of utility easement.
Right.
Which might give a power company the right to come onto your property.
Yeah.
To maintain their lines.
To access their infrastructure.
Right. So that's something you want to know about up front.
For sure.
So you're not caught off guard.
Yeah. You don't want any surprises there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there are covenants, which you often find in those deed-related documents.
Okay.
And they might limit things like building height, paint colors, even the types of pets you can have. It's a reminder that those private agreements can have a big impact on what you can and can't do with your property.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all part of that due diligence process, right? Examining the title and associated restrictions, making sure you understand what you're getting into before you buy.
It's like getting the full picture.
Yeah.
The good, the bad, the sometimes quirky.
Right. No surprises.
Exactly. So next up, we're going to be looking at this idea of reversion.
Okay.
Which is the article's term for what happens towards the end of a property's life cycle.
The end game.
Yeah, the end game. So stay tuned for that.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, we'll be right back.
Sounds good.
And we are back, talking about all things property ownership.
Picking up where we left off.
Yes. So in part one, we talked about, that whole ownership cycle and the different benefits of owning property. And those factors like restrictions and market cycles. That can really impact value.
Right. All those things you need to consider.
Yeah. And now we're going to tackle that big question. How do you actually determine what a property is truly worth?
The million-dollar question.
It is right.
Right.
Buying or selling property, it's a big decision.
Huge.
Getting the price right is essential.
Absolutely, yeah. You don't want to leave any money on the table or overpay for something.
For sure. So the article gives us this great starting point.
Okay.
It poses two fundamental questions. One, who is the most likely buyer?
Interesting.
And two, what is being bought and sold?
Okay, those are good questions. Simple but insightful.
Right, they seem simple.
Yeah.
But they're really powerful when it comes to understanding property value.
I see.
So let's start with that first one.
Okay.
Why is it so important to consider who the most likely buyer is?
Well, because different buyers have different needs, different motivations, different price points. A young family looking for their first home is going to have different criteria than, say, a seasoned investor looking for a rental property.
Right.
So a property's value isn't some fixed number.
Right.
It can change depending on who's interested and what they intend to do with it.
So a property that's perfect for a developer who wants to, build high-rise apartments.
Right.
Might not be appealing at all.
Yeah.
To someone who wants a quiet single-family home.
Exactly. Their vision for the property, their goals, their budget, all those things play a role in determining its worth to them.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so then that second question.
Okay.
What is being bought and sold? Seems pretty straightforward at first.
Yeah, you're buying a piece of land, a house or a building, right?
Right. But is it really that simple?
It's rarely that simple. Remember all those restrictions we talked about before?
Oh, right, yeah.
Easements, covenants, zoning regulations, those all contribute to defining what you're actually getting when you purchase a property.
So it's not just about the physical structure.
Right. It's about the bundle of rights that come with ownership. You could be buying a beautiful house,
right?
But if there's a covenant restricting renovations, that impacts its value.
Right. Or imagine buying land that seems perfect for development.
Yeah.
But then you find out it's zoned for agricultural use only.
Oof. Yeah, that would be a problem.
It really highlights the need for that thorough research.
Right. Due diligence.
Before you commit to a purchase.
Absolutely.
It's like being a detective.
Yeah.
Uncovering all those hidden details.
Right.
That could impact your investment.
Exactly. You got to peel back those layers.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can't forget about the market itself.
Right. The market always plays a role.
Huge roles, right?
Yeah.
Those real estate cycles can have a huge effect on what buyers are willing to pay.
For sure. I mean, think about it. During a booming market,
right,
with high demand, limited supply, prices tend to skyrocket.
Right.
But then during a downturn, when there's more sellers than buyers, prices can plummet.
Yeah, it's all about, trying to anticipate those trends. But it's hard to time the market perfectly.
It is. Yeah, nobody has a crystal ball.
Right. Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen.
Right.
So it's more about understanding those long-term trends and how things like population growth, economic development, even infrastructure improvements might affect the value down the line.
Yeah, those are all good points.
Yeah. It's like thinking several steps ahead.
Right.
Like a chess player.
Yeah.
Anticipating those moves and counter moves.
You got to be strategic.
In this dynamic market.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've talked about determining value in a general sense.
Okay.
But I'm curious about the specific methods that are used to assess a property's worth. What are the tools or the techniques that professionals rely on to come up with a price?
Well, there are several valuation methods,
Okay.
each with its own strengths and weaknesses. One common approach is the sales comparison approach,
Okay.
which involves comparing the property to similar properties that have recently sold in the same area.
So it's like looking at those comps you see online.
Selling what houses in your neighborhood have sold for.
Yep. So by analyzing that, recent sales data appraisers can adjust for differences in feature, size, condition, location,
Right.
and come up with an estimated value for the property in question.
That makes sense for properties where there's a lot of comparable sales.
Right.
But what about, unique properties?
Yeah.
Or ones that haven't had many recent sales to compare to?
Good point.
How do you figure out their value?
Well, in those cases, you might use the cost approach.
Okay.
This method estimates the cost to build an identical property today, and then subtracts depreciation for age, wear, and tear obsolescence.
Okay.
So it's often used for specialized properties like churches or schools,
Right.
which don't have many direct comparisons.
So you're basically figuring out what it would cost to rebuild from scratch.
Right.
And then adjusting for its existing condition.
Exactly.
Okay. And then is there another way?
Yes. There's also the income capitalization approach.
Which is particularly relevant for income-producing properties.
Right.
Like rentals or commercial buildings.
Okay, so now we're talking about investment analysis.
This method involves analyzing the net operating income, or NOI,
Okay.
which is the revenue generated minus operating expenses. You then divide that by a capitalization rate,
Okay.
which reflects the expected rate of return for similar properties on the market.
So you're essentially asking,
Yeah.
if I invest in this property, how much income can I expect?
Right.
And how does that compare to other investments?
Exactly. So the income capitalization approach helps investors assess the financial viability of a property
Right.
and see if it aligns with their investment goals.
It seems like there isn't one right way to determine property value.
No, not really.
It's about using a combination of approaches,
Right?
considering market conditions
Yeah,
and understanding each property's unique characteristics.
absolutely. It's both an art and a science. It requires a deep understanding of market dynamics, property analysis, financial modeling.
Right.
Often it's wise to consult with qualified professionals
Yeah.
like appraisers and real estate brokers who have the expertise to navigate these complexities.
That's a good point. So we've talked about how to determine value,
Right.
but I'm wondering about red flags,
Uh-huh.
warning signs that might suggest a property is overvalued
Okay.
or just not a good investment.
Right.
What should we be on the lookout for?
That's a crucial question. Being able to spot those potential red flags can save you from making costly mistakes.
So tell me, what are some of those warning signs?
Well, one obvious red flag is a property priced significantly higher than comparable properties in the same area. While there might be reasons for a higher price, like unique features or renovations,
Right.
you should always dig deeper. Don't assume a higher price tag automatically equals higher value.
Yeah, it's about questioning those outliers,
Right.
making sure there's a solid justification
Okay.
for a price that seems out of sync with the market.
Yeah. Another red flag is a property that's been on the market for an unusually long time.
Right.
While there could be various reasons for a slow sale, it could also signal that the property is overpriced
Right.
or that there are underlying issues making buyers hesitant.
It's like that saying, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Exactly. It's worth investigating further
Yeah.
and asking tough questions about why the property hasn't sold.
Hmm.
Another red flag to watch out for is a property with a history of frequent ownership changes
Okay.
or short-term rentals.
Hmm.
This could point to problems with the property itself,
Right.
or it could suggest a challenging rental market.
So you're looking beyond the surface,
Right.
digging into the property's history
Yeah.
to see if its past performance
Yeah.
might indicate future challenges.
Precisely be a detective and piece together those clues
Oh,
to get a complete picture of the property's story.
all right. So it's not all about red flags.
Yeah.
Are there any green flags?
Yes, absolutely.
Positive signs that a property is a solid investment.
There are definitely positive indicators to look for as well.
Tell me more about those.
Okay, well, one significant green flag is a property located in an area with strong economic fundamentals.
Okay.
Things like job growth, population growth, a diverse economy. These factors tend to drive demand for housing and support long-term value appreciation.
So it's about looking beyond the property itself
Right.
and considering the bigger picture,
Yeah.
the economic vitality of,
Yeah.
of the surrounding community.
Exactly. A thriving local economy can have a ripple effect,
Right.
boosting property values in the area.
What else might indicate a good investment?
Well, a property that's well-maintained and updated is a good sign,
Okay.
while a fixer-upper might seem tempting as a bargain.
Right.
It's crucial to factor in the renovation and repair costs.
Yeah.
Those can add up quickly.
For sure.
So a well-maintained property is more appealing to buyers or renters, which can lead to higher value and a stronger return on your investment.
So you're balancing that initial purchase price
Right?
with the potential costs
Yeah,
of bringing a property up to par.
exactly.
What about the neighborhood itself?
Yeah, the neighborhood's important too.
Are there any green flags related to the surrounding area?
Yes, look for neighborhoods with good schools, low crime rates,
Okay.
access to amenities like parks, shops, restaurants. These features contribute to quality of life, making an area more desirable and potentially supporting higher property values.
Right. A great house in a less desirable neighborhood
Yeah,
might not appreciate as quickly
right.
as a comparable house in a highly sought-after area.
It's fascinating how a property's value is intrinsically linked to its surroundings.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that interplay between property and place, recognizing that location is a powerful driver of value.
Yeah. And don't underestimate the importance of good transportation access.
Oh, that's huge, especially today with people increasingly looking for alternatives to car-dependent living.
Right.
Easy access to public transportation, major highways,
Yeah.
even bike paths can be a major draw
Right.
for potential buyers or renters.
It's all about convenience and connectivity these days.
It is, yeah.
And that translates to the real estate market as well.
Absolutely.
So we've covered so much ground already
We have.
in understanding how to determine a property's worth.
Yeah. From analyzing market cycles and comparable sales
Right.
to recognizing those red and green flags.
But before we wrap up this part,
Okay.
there's one more critical aspect of property ownership
Right.
we haven't explored yet,
Mm,
and that's the legal framework
right.
that governs real estate transactions.
That's an important one.
So stay tuned for part 3,
Can't wait.
where we'll dive into all the legal details you need to know.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to the show. So we've covered a ton of ground already in our deep dive into property ownership, looking at the financial side, the market dynamics, those crucial red and green flags, and now we're in the final stretch.
The home stretch, right. We've talked about the numbers, the market, the strategies, but now it's time to tackle something that can feel a bit daunting for some. The legal side of things.
Yeah, the legal stuff can definitely seem a bit intimidating. It's all those deeds and titles and easements, and honestly, it can feel like a whole other language sometimes.
It's understandable why people might feel that way, but honestly, a little knowledge can go a long way, and having a good understanding of the basics can really empower you as a property owner.
I totally agree, because let's face it, a mistake or an oversight in those legal documents, that can have serious consequences down the road, right? You don't want to mess around with that stuff.
Absolutely. It's not something you want to take lightly. And that's why I always emphasize working with qualified professionals who can guide you through the process, make sure everything is done right.
So for those of us who aren't legal experts, what are some of the most essential legal documents that anyone buying or selling property should be familiar with? Like, where do we even begin?
Well, the deed is a good place to start. That's kind of the bedrock of property ownership. It's the legal instrument that officially transfers ownership from one party to another.
So it's like the proof that you own the place.
Exactly. It contains all the key information about the property, the legal description, who's selling, who's buying, and any restrictions that might apply.
Okay, that makes sense. And I've heard the term title thrown around a lot too. How does that relate to the deed? Are they the same thing?
They're related, but not exactly the same. The title is more about the legal right of ownership, while the deed is the physical document that provides evidence of that ownership. Like the title is the concept, the deed is the proof.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yep.
So if I have the deed in my hands, that automatically means I have a clear title, no questions asked.
Not necessarily. There could be hidden issues that could cloud the title, things that could create problems for the new owner down the road.
Oh, like what kinds of problems? Give me some examples. This is starting to sound a little scary.
Well, you could have unpaid taxes, outstanding loans, those kinds of things, and those can come back to bite you, even if you weren't aware of them when you bought the property.
Yikes. So how do you protect yourself from those kinds of surprises? How do you make sure you're getting a clean title?
That's where title insurance comes in. It's a policy that protects both the buyer and the lender from financial losses that might arise from defects in the title.
So it's like an insurance policy for peace of mind. You pay a premium, and if something unexpected pops up with the title, you're covered.
Exactly. And considering what's at stake, it's usually a worthwhile investment. It's better to be safe than sorry, especially when it comes to something as important as property ownership.
Now, we touched on easements and covenants earlier in the show, but can you remind us again what those are and why they're so important from a legal standpoint, just to refresh our memory?
Sure. Easements are those legal agreements that give someone else the right to use a part of your property for a specific purpose. Like we talked about before, a utility company might have an easement to access their power line.
Right. I remember that example. Makes sense.
And they can also be for things like shared driveways, or if your property has access to a beach, or even running a pipeline across your land.
Yeah, it seems like easements would be pretty common, especially in areas where properties are closer together and people need to share resources.
They can be, and the key is to be aware of any easements that might affect a property before you buy it, because they can impact how you can use the land. Now, covenants are a bit different.
Right, those are the rules about paint colors and fences and all that, right?
Exactly. They're private agreements, often attached to the deed, that place restrictions on what you can do with the property.
So they might say, you can't build a fence over a certain height, or you can't have more than 2 pets, or you can't cut down that old oak tree in your backyard.
Those are good examples. And they might dictate things like the style of architecture you can use if you're building an addition, or even what kinds of businesses can operate on the property.
It seems like covenants can get pretty specific. And while some might seem kind of trivial, others can really impact how you can use and enjoy your property.
You've got it. So it's really important to read those documents carefully and make sure you understand any restrictions before you buy a property, because you're not just buying the physical space, you're buying a set of rules that come with it.
Right, so we've got deeds, titles, easements, covenants. What else do we need to know about from a legal perspective when it comes to owning property? What am I missing?
Well, zoning is another big one. Those are the local rules that dictate how land can be used. Residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural.
Ah, right, zoning. I've definitely heard that term before. So, like, I can't just buy a property in a residential neighborhood and open up a noisy factory, right?
Exactly. Zoning regulations are there to ensure that development is compatible with the surrounding area and protects the quality of life for residents.
So it's not just about knowing what I can do with my own property, but also understanding how the surrounding properties are zoned.
Exactly. And those regulations can change over time, so it's important to stay informed and know what's happening in your area. You don't want to be caught off guard by a zoning change that could impact your plans down the road.
Man, there's so much to consider. It's a lot to wrap your head around. It really makes you appreciate the complexity of property ownership.
It definitely can feel overwhelming, but that's why it's so important to have a team of qualified professionals who can guide you.
Okay, so let's talk about those experts. Who are the key players that someone buying or selling property should have on their team? Like, who should we be calling?
Well, a real estate agent is a good starting point. They can help you find properties, negotiate offers, and they really understand the local market.
It seems like having a good real estate agent can be invaluable, especially for first-time buyers or sellers who are new to the whole process.
They can be a huge help, that's for sure. They can explain things in plain English, answer your questions, and make sure you don't make any costly mistakes.
So who else should we have in our corner besides the real estate agent?
A real estate attorney is another essential one. They can review those legal documents, make sure everything is in order, and protect your interests from a legal perspective.
Okay, so they're the ones who are really scrutinizing those contracts, making sure there are no hidden clauses or surprises buried in the fine print.
Precisely. They're your advocate, looking out for your best interests from a legal standpoint.
And what about a title company? What role do they play in all of this?
Title companies are the ones who examine public records to ensure a property has a clean title, free of any hidden liens or encumbrances.
So they're the ones doing the deep dive into the paperwork, making sure there are no skeletons in the closet, so to speak.
Exactly. And if they find any issues, they work to resolve them before the sale goes through. They also often handle the closing process, making sure all the documents are signed and everything is done correctly.
Wow. It sounds like having a solid title company can really provide a lot of peace of mind, knowing that all those legal I's are dotted and T's are crossed. This has been such a fascinating look into the legal side of property ownership. It's definitely a lot more complex than I initially realized.
It's a lot to take in, for sure. But honestly, a little knowledge and a good team of professionals can go a long way in making the process smoother and more successful.
So for our listeners who might be feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this legal talk, what's the key takeaway here? What's the one piece of advice you would give to anyone venturing into the world of property ownership?
I'd say do your homework. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And surround yourself with experts you trust. Property ownership is a big deal, both financially and emotionally. But with the right preparation and support, it can be an incredibly rewarding experience.
Great advice. So it's all about being informed, being proactive, and having a good team in your corner. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into property ownership.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights.
We've covered a ton of ground today. The ownership cycle, how to determine a property's worth, those red and green flags to watch out for, and all those essential legal considerations.
Hopefully our listeners feel more confident and knowledgeable about navigating the world of real estate.
I think they do. And remember, knowledge is power. So keep learning, keep exploring, and as always, happy investing.